And we're live. Fading Embers podcast from Empty Wonderland Collective. Welcome back, good people. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's season 2, y'all. It's season 2. This is episode 3 of season 2. And we're going to bring something in here that I hope that we can actually do every season. If y'all keep watching, we might do more seasons. This episode is called Fire from the Shelf. We're going to be talking about our favorite reads in the last 24 months or so, stuff that impacted us, stuff that made us feel good, stuff that told us more about Jesus. If y'all haven't guessed yet, all three of us are Christians, so the books are probably going to be really Christian-y. If you can't tolerate that, this is probably the episode you want to skip. But if you like to read, you like widening your worldview and learning some things from some different perspectives, stick around, get comfy, get you some hot tea or some hot cocoa, and you'll feel pretty good about it. Check us out on Instagram, Empty Wonderland Collective, on Facebook, Empty Wonderland Collective, on Twitter at Empty Wonderland, and on Tumblr, Empty Wonderland Collective. And I am joined by my great and incomparable hosts. Got Trevor A. Stevens in the building today, and I also got Heather Krolicky, also known as the least deserving one. Tell everybody hi.
Shalom.
What up?
So I'm filming live from Baltimore, Maryland, and Heather is as well. And Trevor, you are in, where are you?
Cackalack. South Cackalack. For people that don't get in South Carolina.
In my opinion, the best of the Cackalacks. So
yeah, that's on me too, I believe.
So it's Fire from the Shelf, y'all. Fire from the Shelf. Stuff that lit us up, that came from the shelf in the last 24 months or so. We're going to start off with Heather, ladies first, and we're gonna. You can introduce us to as many as 5 books, but you can only really go in depth about 2. So we'll start with Heather. What you got?
All right. So I guess I'll just do a quick introductory, then I'll talk about.
Go for it.
Okay. So first up, I have No Little People by Francis Schaeffer. Awesome. I'll talk about that one more. Then I have Darwin on Trial. Let's see there. What's the author's name? Philip E. Johnson. That's been good. I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. That's also good. Radical by David Platt.
Woo!
And The New Jim Crow. The authors. All right. So two most impactful. So I guess I'll go back to the Francis Schaeffer one. Basically, I love this book. It contains 16 sermons from Francis Schaeffer, and basically he's just talking about how a lot of times as humans, as believers, we start seeing like our own little flaws and like, man, I can't be good enough to do work in God's kingdom because I'm not a pastor, I'm not this, I'm not that, and we really zero in on everything we're not when it's quite opposite in God's kingdom. It's like, in God's kingdom there are no little people. So even if you're called to, like, your job is to be that janitor, like, you bring the gospel to that job. So it's like there is no little job when at every job that we have or everything that we do, there are people's lives that we're impacting. So I think he did an awesome job of just like really zeroing in on the value of humans, like that, how God created us and how from the janitor to CEO to a pastor to a layman, like we all have a purpose in God's kingdom. And then talking about the body and how not everyone can be a hand, Second one, okay, so I guess I'll go to The New Jim Crow. It's been very impactful and very educational for me. I haven't finished it yet. It's like one of those, you gotta eat it a little bit by a little bit to really impact, to really understand the perspective and what the author's saying. I've been learning a lot just about like the Reagan administration and things, about the racial divide in America and how just history that I wasn't really taught in school, and it's really bringing a lot of things into perspective for me, especially as a white woman in America. It's really helping me have like empathy and understanding Not that I'll ever know what it's like. I'm not a black person, so I won't never fully, but just to really see the history and know how I myself can help, like, and to like speak out against racial injustice and just the incarceration system, how like now that's like a form of slavery, and when you start seeing the facts, it starts making sense, and it's like it's crazy because it's like right there in front of you, and yeah, and just how as a Christian how we're supposed to stand for justice and take care of our brothers and sisters and even our enemies. So it's like it's been really challenging, and it's really been a hard read just to see just things that people go through and just the state of our American society. So those would be my two most impactful ones, though there's a million other ones I would love to talk about.
Amen to those right there. You got some heavy hitters. Got some heavy hitters right there. That new Jim Crow, though, no joke. That's no joke right there.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be piggybacking off some of that when it's my turn to talk about some stuff.
Go first.
Oh, you want me? Because you know you're gonna be long-winded. That's why.
Right.
That's the reason why. All right. So my five. It's a collective volume, a sort of like a volume here by Robert Alter on the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. Genesis out of this collection right here was I never read the book of Genesis from like a Hebrew perspective, so that was super huge. I read this. This probably I might be cheating a little bit because this might be more than 24 months since I read this, but it might be inside the window. C.S. Lewis's Paralandra, which is book number 2 from his space trilogy. So you know, Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and then That Hideous Strength. But this right here was the best of the 3, and man, y'all changed my life. Totally changed my perspective of how I look at God, how I look at even the Genesis story. So these two paired very well. For anybody who's actually been watching the podcast since season 1 and watch episode 1, you'll know that our very first episode, we actually had a special guest, Latifah Phillips, Latifah Alatas, who's the lead vocalist for Page CXBI, who's also the lead singer for, she has her own solo act called Motospira. There's also another band she's part of, Heck Yeah, The Hall. She's just a part of a bunch of different bands and stuff like that. And she has a really good friend in Atlanta, a spoken word poet who's really well known on the East Coast named Amina Brown. And Amina wrote a book, y'all, and it was really good, talking about how Jesus fixes the broken records of our lives. Super good. Another good one here, Andy Crouch, Playing God. Andy Crouch, I got introduced to his work, watching some TED Talks and stuff like that. I said, this brother is onto something. He might actually know Jesus, know something about how the world works too. And so I went ahead and read this book here. I actually have 3 books from Crouch, but this is the first one that I got through. It's one of the books on my goal of things to read in 2018. And this is excellent here. It talks about the dynamics of power and the gospel and how all that comes together. And the number 1 book, which is where I'm going to sort of start with, Just Mercy from Bryan Stevenson, y'all. Whew! So good. So good. It definitely is connected in a lot of ways with the new Jim Crow that Heather is reading. I found out about Bryan Stevenson, the author, from how did I first hear about Bryan? I think I first heard about Bryan either through something that Redeemer Presbyterian Church of New York, that Tim Keller planted that church. I either found out about it through like a Redeemer conference that he had where Bryan was the guest speaker for, or what might actually be how I heard about Bryan was from the Netflix documentary that was done by Ava DuVernay, the 13th, where it's actually talking about the 13th Amendment and the clause in there that slavery was abolished, under the Emancipation Proclamation, but slaves can be recaptured and re-enslaved if they're incarcerated and brought into the penal system. And so Bryan Stevenson was one of the esteemed guests in that documentary that one of the experts that they actually decided to bring on. He is a lawyer. He is actually the head and he's the president and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, also known as EJI. And what they do is that they provide free legal services for condemned inmate people who are on death row, as well as they take on cases as well for other hard kinds of things where people were given really crazy sentences for like nonviolent offenses and stuff like that. And he tends to represent primarily men and women of color, although he can represent anybody. He wrote this book chronicling his experiences as a young lawyer, trying to start this nonprofit organization that was going to provide the legal aid and to try to really shed light on justice. He speaks so much about the Jim Crow era laws that were in this country. He even discusses slavery and how Black people weren't considered to be human beings, and then how during the Jim Crow era the laws still sort of dehumanized them, and then even moving into the era of mass incarceration that we live in now, and the mass prison system. He's talking about how American enslavement of the African diaspora, how that really never went away, but how the form of it really just kind of changed after 200 years went into to Jim Crow for 100 years, and then it's now in the form post civil rights as the age of mass incarceration. So he just really talks about several different cases that he worked as he was actually starting to found this business. And then because he's a Christian, low key, he doesn't preach to you heavy, but he is a Christian. He talks about how it's not just enough to have mercy on someone, but justice also has to be administered. So then we can't just look for the people who we're trying to put in jail. Perhaps maybe there's people who in the system who are innocent, who've had injustice happen to them that we need to get out, or we need to get them off and get them exonerated, and have the community really know that this person was innocent. So that he really works hard on that. He has this thread that on every talk that he gives, that he always says all the time that as human beings, maybe the person who committed the crime deserves to die. Maybe the crime that they committed means that they deserve to die. But as creatures created by God, do we actually deserve to kill them? So that thread is actually running all the way through this book. This book made me cry, y'all. It made me angry. It made me laugh. It's fantastic. This actually, I found out at the job where I work at. I work at a college, a liberal arts school. This is actually one of the books that they teach out of for some of their courses. It's excellent. Doesn't matter if you straight or gay, drunk or high, old or young, if you're a Christian or not, this will resonate with you. But if you're a Christian, especially if you're a Black Christian, or if you're a member of the America's majority culture, if you're a white person from America, born and raised, this here, you need this. This is good. It will blow your mind if it ain't blown yet. So that's the number one. I highly recommend it. And probably number two is going to be reading the book of Genesis out of this anthology here. Robert Alter, he's ancient Hebrew itself is actual dead language, and then the modern Hebrew that we have now is a mixture of other like Yiddish and Aramaic and stuff like that. So it's what composes the new modern Hebrew that we have these days. With ancient Hebrew, he happens to have some expertise in the culture and in the language, and so what he tried to do his best was to take apart the entire Old Testament and to really try to give perspective to a Western thinker what was in the minds of a Hebrew writer as they were breaking these things down, breaking down some of the words and the terminologies. And I'm reading through that, it gave me a completely different perspective of the creation account. It gave me a completely different perspective on, what is a human being, and from God's perspective, made in God's image. And then even like some of the poetic pieces as well. In Genesis, and then in other books of the Bible, it just really gave me a breath of freshness with it. I'll never go back and read Genesis the same ever again. Even during the encounter with Abraham, encountered the three figures just before he began pleading with the Lord to not burn down Sodom and Gomorrah. So these books definitely impacted me deeply. brought a lot of tears, brought a lot of frustration, and made me really think about where I need to go, and then the goodness of God. So those are my 5. That's what I got from the show. So Trevor, since I know you have an extensive catalog there, being in seminary and everything, it's go for it.
So I'm gonna dip into Christian, and I'm also gonna dip into science real quick. So to stretch horizons, Wisdom of Sandhu Singh, Sundar Singh, he is pretty much known as the Paul of India, converted in like the late 1800s. And his sayings are strictly Eastern. There's nothing about that's Western, which is a wonderful thing, especially when you've been Westernized when it comes to the Christian faith. So him, Reviving the Black Church by your boy, Tabiti. And it is once again also an additional great read, pretty much giving us a foundation of where a lot of the isms in a lot of Black church came from, and also on strategic ways that we can also keep our culture and also still maintain a good gospel center. Free at Last with a question mark by your man Carl Ellis. Very, very good read to people that are looking into social justice, wanting to have a better perspective on like the totality of Black thought when it comes to understanding where Christianity has actually got it. I think these two together are very powerful because this is giving you more of the history. This is giving you history with the purpose. And to go with that, Blessing of Africa, also an excellent book. Book is by Keith Burton. He actually goes all the way back to the Kush Kingdom and gives us a great example of how the kingdom spread from Kush all the way to the very beginning of Christianity, all the way into the different wars with the Muslims as they began to come into Africa. Unprovoked, they began to attack a lot of African nations, which is something that a lot of people don't like talking about, but it's the truth. So, but then you also have your boy Ravi Zacharias, which is Jesus Among Secular Gods, which is a head rocker, because he's an apologist, one of the best apologists that we have in this generation. And he knows how to handle each person with love. I mean, he thanks every single person that actually gives him a hateful retort to Jesus. He doesn't even care. And he then just rips their world apart very, very gently. So, but that, trying to see, A Dangerous Calling by Paul Tripp. This is for anybody that's looking to go into ministry. Very, very good to understand and read. He actually questions you on whether or not you really are thinking about going into ministry. Very sound-minded, because it is one of the most dangerous callings that asked for on the planet. Counterfeit Gospel by Trevor Wax. He actually goes through a lot of the gospels that popped over the past 50, 60 years that are problematic. And I'll stop here with the Explicit Gospel by Matt Chandler. And this is going to be one of my 2 that I recommend, just because it's very simple. Matt Chandler has a beautiful way of relaying the gospel. Very, very thankful to have him in this generation in the faith, to be able to observe him and see what he's doing. But he challenges what he coined was moralistic therapeutic deism, which I think was probably one of the dopest explanations for fake Christianity in this generation, like, period. I was like, thank you, because that's exactly what this is. It's Bath and Body Works for Christian for Jesus, you know. That's pretty much what it is. I was like, that's correct. But he challenges, like, you know, God always doing good things for you, always hand holding you, helicopter parenting you, pretty much. And he raises up against a lot of people. I mean, Rick Warren has given this a thumbs up. Rick Warren is also a very good writer, illustrator of the faith, or like relayer of the faith. It's been touted by Dr. Eric Mason and the rest of them as well. But this book challenged me because it was one of the first books I had right before I went to seminary. And I was like, I need to know more. this is one of the first books because it's, like I said, very easy to read. Doesn't have, scholarly words, like where they're like saying words you don't know. You're like, okay, I don't know that word. I wish I did, but I don't know that word. I need to learn that word. But the other one I would say that is my favorite, especially just because of what the aim that I'm at is Blessing of Africa. Um, this book, along with like the books I'm gonna talk about a little bit later on, when we talk about what we're working on for the rest of this year, are geared towards not pro-black isms. I'm not Pan-Africanist. I don't believe in that. I'm not Afro pro-black. I don't particularly believe in that, but I do believe in people being affirmed in their ethnicity because it wasn't by happenstance that your skin color is the way that it is. I don't believe that. I don't believe that God is colorblind. I hate hearing people say that. I hate hearing people say that God don't care about color because all those are lies. Because otherwise, He wouldn't have chosen people strategically throughout the ages to relay the gospel. And that's one of the things that I do appreciate about this particular book as well, because it shows you the plan of redemption for Africa. From Kush, that was very, very intricate to show how Africans actually contributed to the overall projection of faith. Seeing it was one of the main three. You have Africa, you have Asia, and you have Europe, but it was Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome. That was the major portions of the faith in the very beginning. That's where we got the widespread, ability of what we have in scholarship and philosophy and defenses and apologetics. It came from that great loop, but most of that came from Africa. Most of our scholars came from Greece and came from Africa. Most of those Grecians got their tutelage in Africa, but once again, that's something that a lot of people don't know because it's not commonly taught. So like going into books like this, like not to boost a race over another, but just to see the common contributions that they actually had over the course of the past 2 millennia. It's very, very interesting for I think the average Christian would actually enjoy this, and especially for the ones that say that Christianity is a white man's religion. I think that was an excellent read, especially like Tabiti, Ellis, and Burton. I think those are good adds to the shelf.
Absolutely. Anything with Tabiti is a good add to the shelf. That man is so gracious.
He is a G, man. Yeah.
He is. And he's so soft toned and gracious. I mean, he's still gonna come with that sharp truth. But for the most part, I just really appreciate his clarity and his humility as he divides the word. So without a doubt. All right, so Heather, out of the book so far, you talked about the most impactful reads. What have you been able to apply so far from what you've learned from what you've been reading?
Okay, so like I said, I've been reading David Radical Together, which is a little different than the Radical one because he's talking about how like doing it together as a church body, as Christians, how together we can become radical Christians, which should be the normal Christian thing. So I guess the way that I have applied it so far is recently I've been feeling like the Lord, like I've been in school for my master's degree in applied behavioral analysis with a focus in special education because I work with special needs children. And long story short, I feel like the Lord has told me to not be in school for a season, which I don't know if that's going to be a permanent season or if it's just the semester or semester or two. But to really just kind of like, it's challenged me to say like, okay, if I believe that Jesus is King and Lord and he's calling me to give this up or directing me to go a certain way, who am I to say no kind of thing? If he's Lord, which is a tough word for, I think, for our generation and people of today to really understand what a Lord is because we don't really use that kind of like wording, like Lord, and what that actually means. But when someone's your Lord, you don't really have a say and to like really say no. You don't really have that freedom. But
Oh, she went there, y'all.
right. So it's like whereas God like isn't a bad Lord though. Like I feel like we get these images of bad lords, and just like we have like images of bad fathers, where God is a good Lord and a good Father that can be trusted. So he can, if he says to do something, because he's my Lord, my loving Lord, a good Lord, I am to do it. And through that obedience is where you really find that joy and that contentment and peace. So to say all that has challenged me to like trim the fat in my life, things that are not necessarily bad things. School is an awesome thing. I love school. But anything that the Lord hasn't called you to becomes a bad thing. So yeah, so that's where it's been really challenging me to trim the fatty areas in my life, the spiritual fat, the physical fat, all that fat, and just really kind of focus on what really matters at the end of the day and being faithful to what He's called me to, which may look different for someone else, but yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
I'm surprised Trevor didn't get up and run out the room, because trim the fat, especially as it pertains to like biblical things, is one of his favorite phrases.
Oh
So
yeah.
like, I'm surprised he didn't get up and run out the room.
You don't see,
Amen to all that.
you don't see my foot. You get that. Yeah. Like my wife and son are sleeping, so I can't alarm them. Like, Trevor, you okay? trimming the dog on fat. Get it out, man. Let's get some truth in here. Amen. Yeah.
Out of what I've read, and then definitely out of Just Mercy, and then also just sort of revisiting the Bible from more of a Hebraic perspective, what I've been able to apply to that is starting with Genesis. Everything from the creation to specifically like what a human is, like the words that were used when talking about Adam. And I had a conversation about Heather. I had a conversation with Heather about this when she was over recording sometime last year, over here in the studio. How like it wasn't mud or sand that God was creating, the first man out of, but the word refers to something most like dark earth, like humus, and then I was like, oh wow, like humus is like, not only is it dark in color and all that, but it's full of life and full of potential. It's moist, it's not a mud ball. It's not sitting there necessarily at the clay wheel, not at that stage, but it's also not sand. God made something that was full of potential, where everything that he was going to pull out of what we are as human beings are currently comes out of that one man. And so that really leveled the playing field for me. It humbled me, and it really, I'm more and more deeply wanting to treat, people as those who are really made as masterpieces, that were made, in God's image, not to be corny or to be, or to like repeat something that people would say a lot, but like this person is special. There are no mere mortals. You don't just bump into mere human beings. Every single person, good or bad or good, or somewhere in between, like these people were masterpieces, handcrafted, whether they are disabled or whether they're super able, whether they're eloquent or whether they're dumb. And by dumb, I don't mean like stupid. I mean like unable to speak. There's no mere mortal. There's no mere human being. These individuals are made in the image of God. So that really expanded that. And that creation is beautiful. That God is super creative. And then getting to Just Mercy with Brian Stevenson, I just went on a whole sort of field trip in 2017 between Just Mercy, the 13th documentary, another 3-part documentary called Race the Power of Illusion, and then James Baldwin's I Am Not Your Negro. And then I live in the Baltimore area. That's, it's a 60 to 65%, African American city. It's one of the blackest cities on the Eastern Seaboard. So and yet so many of those people are at or just above the poverty line. We've got on the East Coast some of the highest rate of murders you know, in the United States, I know at one point we were Murder One, we were Capital One at one point. That's in one of Heather's poems, y'all. If y'all don't know, y'all need to go and check her stuff out. But Heather quoted that for sure. You know, so seeing that it's such a black city, seeing that it's a city that's filled with so many children of the African diaspora who came across the Middle Passage, it's just huge to me that that we have so many image bearers in Baltimore that either their story is about suffering or their story was affected by tremendous suffering as to how they got here. It's just these things are pressing upon me to try to find more ways to be able to give, you know, African Americans more dignity as image bearers, but then also to find ways to be able to help them with creativity, help them to be able to fight for justice in the area as well, to not let unjust laws just go unvoted against and stuff like that. So it's really pushing me much more into a political activist stage of my life now than I've ever had. Even been trying to develop a relationship with the AND campaign that Justin Giboney and Sho Baraka are the presidents of, and so it's just that's sort of where I'm at right now. Just really trying to see the dignity in God's image bearers and trying to spur them on towards good works and loving others, especially those that are different from them. So that's what I've been able to apply so far. Trevor, what have you been able to apply from what you've been reading so far?
I think one of the major things that has truly blessed me over the last year is critical thinking. Like that's just one of the things I think a lot of Christians just run from. Like, I gotta think about stuff. No, I'm just gonna trust in the Lord. I'm like, yeah, but you're gonna run across somebody that will say the right thing and that will more than likely either encourage you or discourage you, or in some cases pull you away. Because we watched one of the things I think Julian, Heather, you probably have too. Watched a lot of people fall away from the faith. A lot of people. I mean, it's been over minor things. Like you stumble over that. But it's because they were not critically thinking about those things before the person actually interpreted or said it to them, or when they were introduced to a problem, they were not able to actually overcome it, or to have peace with it with the Father. Because sometimes peace don't mean that you get an answer. Sometimes peace means you just have to deal with it. you get a Habakkuk answer, which is, I am the Lord and I sit on the throne. And I'm letting Babylon take your city. And you're like, but why? I'm the Lord and I sit on the throne. You know, and you have to have peace about that. So I mean, but pretty much, especially like going through history. I've always been a buff of mythology, love mythology. History was one of the things I kind of struggled with when I was younger, but I always loved mythologies of different lands. But being able to kind of see the Lord making them intersect in my mind now, where I'm getting a better understanding of how mythology and culture and history kind of intertwine to make an image, has been quite helpful, and has made me slow down when I look at different cultures. This particular culture is not savage. This particular culture is not civilized. There are certain things that we normally qualify in the Western world as a person being either better or worse than another culture that is strictly Western in many ways. Certain ways when you see people doing like very like animism and stuff like that, most of the time you go to the East, that's something that's really frowned upon. When you're like, drinking animal blood and stuff like that, which does happen in a lot of cultures. Things like that, people are like, now you're a savage. But as far as like just a person living like in a hut or a person living in a big house doesn't determine whether that person's a savage or not. But going through history and seeing how the thought process of people has changed, and sometimes in certain ways are looping around again, has been quite helpful. And the application of critical thinking has made me better to actually help people that come to me with questions and stuff like that. Well, I'm not smacking them over the head with a bunch of words all the time. Sometimes I think Julian usually gets most of that because he catches me on off times. So I'm like, bro, you hitting me while my brain is on cool off. And it's like 85 things at once. But normally throughout the day, like when I'm encountering people, I'm able to answer questions well, a lot more sense and a lot more grace as well. Like, and that's one of the things I think that over this past year, that's been one of the greatest tools is learning how to critically think and learning how to answer appropriately. You're muted, Julian. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
I was like, okay, it's either he's a mute, he's like imitating a mute,
or losing it. You know, the connection.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah,
gotcha. What we were gonna do another segment, but in the interest of time, because you guys are hardworking individuals as well. I don't know if I know I'm off tomorrow because it's MLK. Heather, are you working tomorrow?
Not at my full time, but at my part time.
Trevor, you working tomorrow? No, you're not working tomorrow, Trevor. Oh,
no.
Okay. Well, yes, thank the Lord. What we're gonna do is we're gonna move into a shouting moment, y'all. So for those who are unfamiliar with what a shouting moment is, it's something that you can find in Black church when the preacher starts to sweat a little bit and he starts to get a little bit excited and he's speaking something that is resonating down with your soul, and your soul just wants to say, "Amen, Pastor. Amen." That there is the shouting moment. That's what we call in Black church the shouting moment there. So starting with Heather, based on the things that you have been reading so far, your shouting moment this time is going to be about the next books on your list to read. The ones that you're going to tackle after the pile that you discussed here is completely done. What do you got? What do you got?
Everything that Trevor just mentioned. So if y'all can hit me up with a list of everything that you just said, perfect.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Yeah. Let's see. What I have next up on the list is Unashamed by Lecrae. That's next up on the list. And I've got two more books by Andy Crouch to read as well that are both also talking about power. So one's called Strong and Weak, and then the other, I can't remember what the other is actually the other I'm reading right now, called something about culture. I can't remember the title, but those are pretty much on my next up. So I can't think of anything beyond that I want to jump in. I know I got Good and Angry. I've got a couple things that Trevor recommended tonight that's in my list. that's already in my list because he's like, hey, you need this. And so what ends up happening is that I go into Amazon and I add it to my list. So that's my shout moment. To God be the glory on those reads there. Trevor, what do you have on for your shout moment for what you're going to be reading next?
This right here, Gusto Gonzalez, The History of Christianity. That's really all I can say. Like this is literally the best Christian history book I've ever touched. Like it's a comprehensive from the cross to now. I think it's like in 3 volumes. But it's absolutely amazing. This one right here, also another head rocker, is going to cause a lot of controversy. The problem in slavery in Christian America. This goes from 1604 all the way to Jim Crow into the Civil Rights Movement, showing how how Christianity, and when it was introduced to the slave in America, was actually introduced as a level of oppression, which a lot of Black people using that as a thing to say that Christianity is a white man's religion, but you have to actually have this to realize that it's not. But this is very good for people that want to actually get a better and honest picture of what actually happened throughout the Americas from the early colonies to now. Also another one by Gusto. This is also I just thumbed through it just a little bit. I got to get into it. It's the history of Christian thought. So this is like philosophers. You were talking about apologists and apologetics. This actually lists every single major apologist that popped into the Christian faith from the first century all the way to what we are right now. And the last 3, they actually come in a volume by Mr. Hall, It is the reading the scriptures with the church fathers, learning theology with the church fathers, and living wisely with the church fathers. There's actually 4. The other one's in the room right now because I keep it by the bed and I read through it when before I go to sleep. It's called worshiping with the church fathers. And pretty much it's actually giving you a better view on how Christianity in its very inception did things so differently from where we are right now. And also challenges you on how you view baptism. I mean, like just to, and I'll say this and I'm shutting up, but they actually talked about the ritual of baptism back in the day was actually for mourning and also for celebration. So there was actually a service around it where there was a ceremony of mourning where the person would actually see that everything that they've done until this point without Christ was worthless. Mm. And then there is a celebration of joy the moment that they come through the water and they actually share in the first communion. And also the communion being a portion of a suffering and mourning, also of joy. There was always a good collaboration of mourning and joy in the church history that showed us that we had to have a good view on both rather than having a very happy, moralistic, therapeutic theism. It encouraged us to have a more balanced diet when it came to understanding the faith. So those are on my list right now for the future.
Word. Well, everybody who tuned in, thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Thank you for bearing with this episode here. I mean, as you can see, we like to read and we like to read some stuff that might be a little bit challenging, just a little bit, especially Trevor, reading all these big books and stuff like that. All them roach killing theology books. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. Y'all check us out on social media. We on Tumblr, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Links in the description. Definitely feel free to drop us a comment. Did you like it? Did you like it? Did you like it? Did you not like it? We want to know on both. Definitely feel free to drop us a comment. You will be catching us again. We have lots and lots and lots more good content coming together for season 2. Until then, grace and peace, y'all.
Shalom.
See ya.